From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, a very warm welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. It's just gone 12 noon, 7 a.m. in Philadelphia and around the world. It's time for the Muckrakers. And here on the Muckrakers, we always pledge to continue tackling the most pressing and controversial news issues of our time. And boy, have we got a few of those. Our mission is to continue providing more light and less heat in our unwavering quest to uncover the truth and to inform, educate and entertain, all with dignity and respect. And that's what I really like. Whatever our guests have to say, it's a platform for them to air their views. We may not agree with them, but we will always certainly listen to them. And it's important that we don't just ask the questions, but question the answers. And boy, is freedom of speech ever under threat. Today, we're going to discuss Telegram and the arrest of its founder, CEO Pavel Durov. And I'm delighted that the Muckrakers is made up of me, Andrew Eborn, TNT host Basil Valentine, and the wonderful Pele Neroff Taylor makes his return visit as well. Welcome, gentlemen.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah,
it's good to
be with you again, Andrew.
And it's great that we can speak. That's a wonderful thing. There's a little meme going around at the moment, which is this. I think, therefore, I am arrested. There we go. Have a look at that. This is it's working on that sort of basis. That there are dancing René Descartes in Britain. I think, therefore, I am arrested. And how true is that? Everybody says, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to your death the right to say it. And they all attribute it to Voltaire. It wasn't Voltaire at all, but rather the Evelyn Beatrice Hall. And we've got this arrest, which we've just heard about. There was a press release, which you probably saw, from the Tribunal Judiciaire de Paris. I'll read just a bit of it just to put it into context. Pavel Durov, founder and CEO of instant messaging and platform Telegram, was arrested at the airport in the outskirts of Paris on Saturday, the 24th of August. He was then taken into police custody at 8 p.m. This measure comes in the context of judicial investigation, which apparently had been opened on the 8th of July. And it was basically against a person unnamed at that stage on charges of complicity. And there's various complicities they talk about, including webmastering of online platform to enable an illegal transaction in an organized group, certain child pornography and various other things, and refusal to communicate. And the list goes on and on and on. Pele, what's your take on it?
Well, it's obviously that I remember the revolutions of 1989 against the Soviet Empire, and I wonder if we're sort of at the revolutions against the American Empire, and it starts from within the American Empire itself, with RFK saying that freedom of speech is dead in Europe. He's joining up. It's almost talking about a uniparty, just as you had a kind of uniparty in Eastern Europe in 1989. Everyone was lining up against the communists, whether they were leftists, ecologists, or conservatives. You're seeing something like that in America now with Trump and RFK, and basically the whole a lot of the old Democrat Party are kind of flocking over to Trump and giving him much needed heft in terms of policy and credibility in terms of getting the independence. So they're talking about that. They're using Elon Musk as a multiplier of their views, and of course a lot of the empire's lies are being aired on on X, from the various assassinations that have been carried out by the West. And the stories about Ukraine that go completely against, what you read in the mainstream media. You've got Elon Musk with 200 million supporters. You've got, what's his name, Tucker Carlson, I don't know, maybe 80 million. You've got Trump himself with 90 million people. These figures dwarf anything that comes out of the Daily Telegraph and all the other deep state assets that the UK and French and American intelligence agencies have used to spread their narrative. And we're living in an era of narrative control. NATO said the first battlefield is not the front line, it's the brain. And they feel that they're losing. So it's a mistake just to say it's a French thing. I think it's coordinated. I think the UK Foreign Office was probably in on it. The US State Department was in on it. So we mustn't exonerate. I think they're all on the same side and they want to dampen free speech. And I think this could be a shot across the bows for Elon Musk, sending that Elon Musk is too powerful at the moment. But Pavel Durov, of course, he's East European and it's easier. And I guess some people say that Elon Musk is more compromised in terms. He's opened some back doors on X. I mean, these guys have to be diplomats, as it were. They've got to choose their battles. But Durov, as far as I understand, he's been a very, very firm. Some people, of course, say that he's at Kremlin. I mean, so the Kremlin have backdoors onto Telegram in a similar way that Facebook has backdoors to the CIA. I don't know. It could be. So it is a bit of a Cold War, but it's also a war against free speech and a shot across the bows because the resistance is rising. It failed in the UK. It sort of failed in France, but in the US, it's a big issue. I think Trump could win. That's my take.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And the great news is we had Errol Musk on, the father of Elon, last week, and he's agreed to come on regularly on to the Muckrakers. In fact, we're going to have him back on Thursday. He's talking to Elon. We're going to get it directly from Errol, exactly what has been said. But clearly he's a supporter of Telegram and free speech, and he's got his own battles. What's your take, Basil?
Well, it's a really multifaceted, multi-layered business, this arrest of Pavel Durov, particularly within the European, which has been one of the keenest censors. All sorts of legislation has been passed in recent years about regulating the internet and holding senior executives to account for everything that is posted on their channel, which is frankly bizarre. How can somebody like Durov possibly know from moment to moment what is being posted on Telegram? And Telegram is the least self-constricted of all the platforms, although Musk, and rightly so, has made X far more of a free speech platform than it was under the previous ownership. It's not quite as free speech absolutist as Telegram, which contains some horrific stuff. Like, for example, there are channels of Israelis devoted to cheering on the genocide, but he hasn't been arrested for that, Durov. He's been arrested for failing to prevent terrorism because apparently criminals are using Telegram both for child sex networks and indeed to organize terrorist attacks. That's the claim. Anyway, now, just this morning, the Kremlin has said that the serious accusation against its national, Pavel Durov, would be viewed as an attempt to restrict freedom of communication unless they are backed up with serious evidence. Shades of the Julian Assange case there. Durov, of course, Russian-born, was arrested as part of investigation into crimes about images of child abuse, drug trafficking, and fraudulent transactions on the platform, according to French prosecutors. Reuters have not been able to reach the lawyer for Durov, and I'm not sure that Durov has been able to reach his lawyer either. Apparently, his requests for consular access were initially declined. So just this morning, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has told reporters on a conference call that Russia is ready to provide Durov with all necessary assistance, but that Durov's French citizenship, he is a dual national. He also holds, in fact, he's a triple national because he also holds a UAE passport. And a further wrinkle in this particularly complex international web of intrigue is the disappearance of a glamorous Russian crypto investor who'd been seen with Durov just days before he vanished. She's now vanished too. She's known as Yulia or Yuli Vavilova, aged 24, and she's described as an influencer, investor, and sort of generally a sort of 21st century entity. That's what we get these days, these sort of model influencer crypto investors. A very attractive woman, from what I can tell. And she was seen with Durov before his arrest, and she has completely vanished too. So it's a bit of James Bond type stuff going on here. But there's more to the story than that. It's also been suggested, and this was on Redacted with Clayton Morris, that our jolly old friends, those pesky Israelis, they could be behind the disappearance of Durov, who may well have been arrested on the orders of the CIA. Well, what have the Israelis got to do with it? Well, a few days ago, shortly before Durov's arrest, there was a massive hack of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament website. Huge amounts of data were stolen, apparently by a group of Iranian hackers, but that is anything but proven. At the moment, if you go to the Knesset website, it's basically down. You can't get there. And the threat, of course, is that Telegram is being used along possibly with WikiLeaks for the dissemination of all sorts of information, extremely incriminating to the Israeli government. But we don't know that. That is a degree of speculation, obviously. So that's where we are as of lunchtime today in London.
And it's always, thank you, Baz. It's always interesting, isn't it? I mean, we're quite right to question everything. As George Orwell says, if liberty means anything at all, it's the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. And that, boy, do we continue to do that here on the Muckrakers. The question, however, is the balance between that and these various illegal activities. Because in the press release, what the police are saying is that he's responsible for all this stuff, and he may not himself be part of the criminal thing. It's about complicity and refusal to communicate at the request of the competent authorities information or documents necessary for carrying out the operating interceptions allowed by law. So it goes to the very heart of the responsibilities that these platforms have for the material which is on it. And I think that's sort of looking at that sort of side. But I'm very interested just to have a look at this sort of thing. The custody period was extended until the 25th of August by an investigative magistrate and can last up to 96 hours, basically. So that gives it until the 28th of August, given applicable procedural for organised crime offences. And I think it's worth looking at the background to Telegram itself. For people who don't know, it was founded by Pavel Durov and his brother after Russia's crackdown following pro-democracy protests in 2011-2012. The Russian government tightened control over the internet, requiring telecom companies to store and share communication data with security services. Telegram itself, it promotes privacy, and it became popular amongst Russians originally as a way to communicate and share news securely. In 2018, Russia attempted to ban Telegram for not handing over encryption keys, but the ban was ineffective and it was lifted in 2020. Telegram is now widely used, including by governed Russian in Russia, as a major source of news in Ukraine. And then in March 2024, it was reported that Telegram has cooperated with Russian authorities to remove prohibited content. And they also claim, and Telegram itself, they claim to comply with EU laws, because that's the gist of this. This is the main sort of thing, and states that its content moderation practices are improving. I'm not quite sure what those moderation practices are, because it seems as though there's all sorts of material there at the moment. Durov himself, he holds multiple citizenships, frequently travels in Europe, and Telegram argues he is not responsible for platform misuse. What's your take on that, Pele?
Well, I mean, I guess this thing about child pornography, it's what the intelligence agencies always trot out when they want to get at someone. It's never about freedom. It's always about safety, isn't it? And whenever I hear the word safety, I get suspicious, you know? Well, I don't know. I don't have all the, I guess, I mean, I don't know. I'm going to sort of change the terms of the argument and say, well, I mean, is Raytheon responsible for the genocide in Israel? You know, people use guns. Guns don't kill people. People kill guns. So should he be responsible for things that he hadn't conceived of, or just for providing a platform? I guess there's a difference between a publisher and a platform. A publisher is responsible, and a platform is a piece of neutral technology that is agnostic with respect to the stuff that goes on there. From what I understand, is that there's only one email account you can do to send your complaints. So it has to be active monitoring by users of illegal content. And that, rather than the sort of the active monitoring that you used to have on Facebook. Facebook, incidentally, has become much more open. I've been posting a lot of the stuff to flag up my own show, which I guess might have been censored 2 or 3 years ago. And I think Zuckerberg's taken his foot off the brakes. So maybe you're seeing what you're seeing in Silicon Valley is you do see Peter Thiel and so on gathering around him, more conservative or more Republican tendencies in Silicon Valley and opening up on the censorship there. So that's a positive counter effect. But I mean, my idea is, I'm not a lawyer. I can't really. I'm a sort of free speech absolutist. So I think, you know, anything goes. And I'm always I'm always just viscerally suspicious as soon as anyone talks about safety and harms done. You know, I mean, people playing in the playground is harmful. We've got too much safetyism in our world, you know, and what is it, Generation Z or whatever you want to call it, who are not allowed to go out in the garden barely. And I think that Andrew, you know, our generation, we were taught to take our knocks in the playground, and
Yes.
we probably saw, you know, um, we're talking about. I mean, we grew up in a more I don't know, a rougher world is in a way, and that where we didn't have to be barred from everything, and the state and the intelligence agencies have pushed us into this culture of not being exposed to stuff. Anyway, that's my thought on the topic.
Oh no, very intense. We're going to do a deeper dive into this. I'll tell you what the law is after. It's all about content moderation, to what extent the platforms have to do it, and that's what the police are effectively saying. They haven't done it enough. And you mentioned about Zuckerberg. Well, he's just admitted, we're going to look at this as well, three astonishing things. There's a big letter which has just come out saying that he admitted that the Biden-Harris administration pressured Facebook to censor Americans. This is quite shocking stuff. Facebook, as a result, did censor Americans, including about COVID and so on and so forth. And also, he admitted that they were forced to throttle Hunter Biden laptop stories. So the pressure that's put on these platforms by those in power needs to be examined as well. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to go into further detail on these shocking stories. Don't touch that dial.
I'm Cal Fire Battalion.
This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers. Me, Andrew Eborn. I'm also joined by Basil and Pele, TNT's Titans. We love it. And talking about Titans and freedom of speech, we've been looking at Telegram and the arrest of the CEO in Paris. We've looked at all the charges. And basically, Western governments have criticized Telegram for inadequate content moderation. And looking at some of the history, I've been looking at this. And Telegram, they've had fines beforehand in Germany for non-compliance with local laws. And it was temporarily suspended in Brazil over data sharing issues. And public figures such as my good friend Elon Musk have expressed their support for Durov following his arrest. Basil, we've looked at Telegram. It's continue, as you say, it is the ultimate free speech platform. What else do you know about it and its content moderation? Because it's very difficult to see what moderation there is, isn't it?
Well, that's the whole point, and that's why he's been arrested, is that there is almost no moderation. And interestingly enough, the Russians themselves have previously tried and failed to block Telegram and have fined the company several times for failing to delete what it deems to be illegal content. So this isn't necessarily just a Russia versus the West thing. But Peskov, the Russian ministry spokesman this morning, said that Durov's case could be seen as the intimidation of the head of a large company. And he cast doubt on the assertion by President Emmanuel Macron that there was no political motive to Durov's detention, that it's merely a coincidence that he's a Russian, of course. Worth noting, though, that, who are the people driving the censorship? Who elected them? Ursula von der Leyen, elected by no one. Jens Stoltenberg, elected by no one. The European Commission is behind the framework of regulations that govern the internet in the European Union area. And of course, no one ever voted for anyone in the Commission. So you've got unelected bureaucrats deciding who can and cannot speak. And that's a very dangerous situation.
Yeah, you make sense. I mean, Telegram, I always like to make sure we're balanced here on the Muckrakers because it is essential. And I would like to get somebody else on Telegram. I always get our hard-working producer to try and get as many people on as possible to air those voices. But they maintain they actively monitor and remove harmful content daily to prevent misuse. And I know, as I say...
Just to highlight the hypocrisy, Andrew, Jackson Hinkle, who's garnered millions of followers on the X platform in recent months, posted the following, that Durov faces up to 20 years in prison. I mean, it's worth remembering that this isn't merely a sort of symbolic arrest to give someone a bit of a scare or something. This could well lead to very serious charges that then lead to an enormously long prison sentence. And he's pointed out that Durov is apparently responsible for permitting terrorism to be sort of conspired on his platform while the US funds a genocide, that he's apparently allowing images of child abuse to appear while the US government has failed to do anything about the Jeff Epstein web and his clients, of course. Money laundering, while the US launders hundreds of billions of dollars through Ukraine, and drug trafficking, while the US arms 80% of the drugs cartels in Mexico, and of course has a long history via the CIA of involvement in crack cocaine and so on and so forth. So it's interesting, these freestyle individuals get hung out to dry, but a lot of the real villains never get called to account.
Yeah, and some very interesting points. And talking about an interesting point, we were just speaking before we came back on air, Pele, that you were saying that he must have known when he went to Paris that he was likely to be arrested. Tell me your views on that.
Well, I just thought that he's a very clever guy. He's moved to the UAE. He's got a French passport, and I mean, if you're the head of X, you must have tentacles into all kinds of intelligence agencies, people telling you and tipping you off. And I'm not even clear if he was just stopping off in Paris to refuel or he's going to head somewhere else. And this strange, I mean, I just want to focus on the personal things, that was he hoping to meet Macron? Was it a sort of a self-sacrifice? It's almost like a novel or a film. The hero goes to the drag enemy's den or something as a form of sacrifice. Or because he's hoping to do some kind of negotiation or something. I mean, I just can't believe, was he lured? Was his girlfriend just saying, let's have lunch in Paris? I just want to focus on these things. It'll emerge in the weeks to come. I think that, lesser men have been undone by a beautiful young woman. And then I thought that Macron maybe is upset. He's upset with all the social media because of all this airing about Brigitte Macron being a man. It's all been all over X. I didn't follow. And I think that, all that talk about sending troops into Ukraine was maybe a way to distract from all the talk about his alleged homosexuality, those photos all over. There are no secrets anymore. I mean, all the scandals about Obama being gay, maybe having knocked off people, all these things are being aired on X quite openly. And Obama, people are examining quite closely, the sort of fervor that only Xers can produce. They're focusing on the crotch area of Brigitte Macron on a recent bikini shot to see if there's something compromising. I mean, how embarrassing is not that for the president of the Fifth Republic? He's standing there surrounded by Napoleonic statues and so on, and he's undone by this speculation. So I don't think that could be an issue with his social media. And then, of course, you have Thierry Breton, the head of the Commission's information, being compared to a woman, looks like a granny, doesn't he? And so all this memeing that they have to subject it to. I mean, power does not like being humored, does it? So in a way, it's
Basil,
yes, you make a very good point. I saw the pictures of Mrs. Macron, and yes, it was quite revealing what was going on below the waist. And of course, as you say, it was also pointed out that the rest of the clientele on this boat, presumably in the Mediterranean, where Macron was enjoying a holiday, were all males of a certain age, ilk, and appearance. And the suggestion was indeed that Macron is in fact a closet homosexual. I mean, I couldn't care less what he likes in his private life, but as you say, it's the fact that, I mean, really, it's a huge public humiliation for somebody who wants to appear dignified, even to the point of being regal in the case of the French president in the absence of a monarch, to be laid bare in such a way. He may well want revenge against social media in general for that kind of thing.
Well, I'm sure he's delighted he's got Basil's blessing to do what he likes. But the reality, all social media, they have all these ridiculous stories, and some of them are not ridiculous, which is why you need to keep asking those questions, bearing in mind, obviously, defamation law. And he may well have been in Paris for the Paralympics, which are just about to start as well. But I want to look a bit at the man staying compliant with, because obviously it's contempt of court if we prejudice any potential criminal case going forward. But having a look at a bit of the history of Pavel Durov himself, the co-founder of Telegram, he's known for his anti-establishment views and his commitment to free speech. And he's basically also known for his refusal to comply with government demands, in the same way as Elon, when he got that little note just before his brilliant interview with Trump. He got his note from the EU. He copied a particular meme telling them where to travel and how to travel, with the beginning with an F. So the reality was exactly that sort of side. So he is a champion of free speech. But my concern is this: it does sort of highlight to what extent should they be responsible for this content? Because we all agree there's certain content which is abhorrent, and certain content from my position, if it incites hatred, it incites violence, if it's illegal content from that point of view, then clearly steps should be taken to remove it. The question is this: to what extent should these platform owners be responsible for that content? Pelly, what are your views?
I don't know. I mean, you're the lawyer, Andrew. I mean, I just don't know. My feeling is that as soon as you start talking about incitement to hatred, the whole thing it's quite a slippery kind of law, because how do you determine intent? And if you, I mean, it's all this. You start talking about thought crime, because do you in the US? I looked a little bit about the US versus UK free speech laws, and I've been bigging it up on my show, because I want to put blue water between. I want to make the Americans out to seem freer so that they can go and elect Trump and maybe reform the rest of the world. But basically, to sort of stoke their 1776 latent rebel spirit. And I noticed that the Americans are more outspoken and say exactly what they think, more so than the Brits, because tied up with all these libel laws and so on. And I think that the Americans on Twitter are really anti-British at the moment, because they're saying we can unless you say something, go and burn down this mosque in this street right now, you can't be done for incitement. Whereas the British have a much broader definition of it, so that you have all these people being locked up in the UK for on very loose grounds that you never get locked up in the US for. And I think the US hasn't seen many far-right riots. It's a violent society in terms of higher murders. But if you look at the all-white states, for instance, in North of America, their murder rates are not higher than in the UK much. It's 1.6 or something. So is that argument, people kill people, not guns kill people. So their generous weapons laws might not have actually. So I've become Americanized in some of my views on that. I mean, I accept the Second Amendment arguments to some extent. Anyway, so what I mean is, just because America has a freer intellectual climate, I mean, it's that climate that produces Elon Musk and his Man to Mars project. It's that always probing and testing what you can do and think openly. And I noticed that not just America. I mean, Americans. It's my introduction to America, this show that I'm hosting. Swedes are no better than the Brits, and the Swedes boast that they're the freest society in the world. I mean, they have, when you ask people, is it important to live with freedom of speech? The Swedes are right up there, like 99%. Right. But in practice, they're not so free. It's a sort of internal process, and ditto the Brits somehow. So I'm coming at you from a sociological, cultural perspective, because I can't give you the legal arguments. But
any perspective.
What I'm saying is that
Basil,
Americans don't seem to be deluged with all those things that the British intelligence services are warning about, but just because they have a freer society than Britain,
I would, suggest we look at it another way from the point of view of law enforcement as well, which is that you would think law enforcement would be quite happy for people to post illegal material on a platform like Telegram, so long as they can find out who they are, because then they can go and prosecute them. So, if Telegram are willing, for example, to divulge the URL or identity, such as they have of it, because of course it is still possible to completely mask your identity online. But if Telegram are willing to turn over whatever information they hold about people posting images of child abuse, trying to organize terrorist acts, or conspiring to murder, defraud, or any other criminal activity, then in a way, social media is a means of flushing out these people, getting them to confess to their misdeeds. And that can be used by law enforcement, because it's not as if if Telegram goes away, people are not going to continue with those crimes. It just means that one semi-public avenue where they could be uncovered and extracted from society has been removed. So it's actually entirely counterproductive for law enforcement to want to shut down a channel like Telegram, or for that matter, force Telegram to delete illegal messaging, when really what it should be doing is reporting that illegal messaging and the people who do it to the authorities. But as for Durov, why is he in the crosshairs? Well, in a clip on RT, which unfortunately, of course, we're not allowed to watch in the UK anymore. I mean, people seem to forget that grotesque act of censorship. He outlines his key principles, which are the freedom to communicate privately, the freedom to express yourself publicly, and the freedom to build your own apps and businesses online. Now, there's no doubt that, the European Union doesn't really like any of those. It doesn't like your freedom to communicate privately. It doesn't like your freedom to express yourself publicly. And it doesn't like your freedom to build your apps and businesses. Doesn't like admitting as much in as many words. But that's nevertheless the direction that the Commission have been taking us.
Yeah, I think it's also worth... Yeah, go for it, Pellies.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, that the Europeans, because I used to work in Brussels, and, I never had such good meals on the taxpayer's dollar in my life. And, Basil and I had long conversations when he was couldn't understand why I was pro-EU, because we agree about much else, practically everything else. And I said, I just say you won for Italian senator's daughter. That's all I need to tell you. Italian senator's daughter. And he said, okay, no, say no more. No, but what I mean is, sorry. Free speech.
Is there a story there? You've got to tell us this. You can't say that. I'll come back to that. The Italian senator's daughter. We're going to come back to that.
Next show, you've got to invite me again. No. I mean, what I'm saying is it's a degree of romance. It's a degree of feeling about Europe that often underpins people's Europhilia and American philia or whatever. Right. No, what was I going to say but the thing people spent millions and millions of pounds on, or dollars or euros on, is there's endless conferences on why Europe can't innovate and why we're falling behind and why we can't create apps or whatever it is. And I think it's basically because we've lost the capacity for free speech. Free speech is at the root of everything. The Americans make mistakes all the time. I mean, what you call conspiracy theories is half the time, as you said, it's right, but half the time they're wrong, just as a science experiment is 99 times wrong before you get it right. Like Edison probably had 1,000 examples of something that went wrong before he got his light bulb or whatever. So it's a willingness to expose yourself and come up with things that might not work out. And the Americans are always testing these possibilities of future truths. And that's the root of investigative journalism. You have hypotheses and half of them fall down, and then you get called a conspiracy theorist because you entertained the thought. It's like asking a question. And then these idiot Europeans are saying, oh, you're trying these. In America, you're allowed to be bankrupt. In Europe, you're not allowed to be bankrupt. It's a social stigma. So again, this is a totally different approach to trying and failing and being open, an openness that I don't think you find in Europe. So there's the answer. The Europeans don't take risks, and they want their 10-week holidays or whatever. And sorry, yeah. So
interesting. I think the point on it, and it's worth emphasizing, is that this is really, we're just talking. Whilst we absolutely massive advocate for freedom of speech, we're not an advocate for criminal activities. And this is the real nub of the issue, if you like, is to what extent is Telegram responsible for those criminal activities, such as child pornography, fraud, or drug trafficking. And that's the real issue. But before the break, though, I don't want you to go away with this, because the Italian senator's daughter, tell us all about her.
No, it was just a girlfriend I had, back then. And it was all very nice.
Take the word just out, Pelly. It was a lovely girlfriend I had back then, courtesy of the European Union.
That's right.
Is that right? Oh, right. Okay. Well, that will all be coming out in his biography, and watch all available in all good bookshops very, very soon. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to look at Zuckerberg's revelations, as well as doing a deeper dive into Telegram. Don't touch that dial.
Military family.
Tracking global corruption and threats that undermine our security. This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, a very warm welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, and Basil Valentine, and also Pele, who's just revealed the secrets about the senator's daughter. All of that in his autobiography, coming out in a bookshop near you very, very soon. I want to touch on, first of all, contempt of court, because obviously he's now been arrested, and what happens in various jurisdictions around the world, there are restrictions as to what you cannot say. And so basically, a lot of people are getting into trouble, including on social media, if they start speculating. And the whole idea is that justice, everybody's entitled to be assumed to be innocent until proven guilty. So all this stuff about digging up whether there have been past convictions, calling into character, looking at the evidence and things like that, could expose people to contempt of court in various jurisdictions. So a bit of a warning about that. We're reporting about the arrest. We're talking about general things on freedom of speech. But let me bring Basil in. What's your take on that, Basil?
Well, Zuckerberg sold your information, so he's a free man. Pavel Durov didn't, so he's in jail. That's one take on the X platform this morning. And another is punk Pavel Durov got arrested. Why? Because he built a P2P social media app where people could exchange words without the worry of surveillance. He gave the power back to the people, creating an encrypted communication channel for them. The usage of such tools should be subjective, but it's mainly for the greater good of use of privacy, which is more important than anything in this world. Arresting him in the name of providing a platform to bad actors is a stupid argument. It's akin to arresting Vitalik for building Ethereum, because any scanner can launch a meme coin off it and scam people. Such stupid arguments completely dodge the major benefits. Well, I think this poster is absolutely right. It's, the idea, and this is what all this new regulation is based around, of holding senior management on platforms responsible for what other people post. I mean, isn't society supposed to be based on individual responsibility? I can't blame Pele for something I do. This goes back to people that were deplatformed when, this was 10 years ago, third parties posted something unpleasant on their wall on Facebook. Now, Facebook isn't, quite certainly in the West, the forum that it was 10 years ago. X has completely overtaken it. But I could go to Pele's Facebook page, or yours, Andrew, and post something deeply offensive anonymously, and it's associated with you because it's on your page, quite apart from the fact it's also associated with Mark Zuckerberg. So we have to get back to individual responsibility for our own words and actions. That should be the key parameter. I mean, at the end of the day, Telegram or X, they're effectively like a lavatory wall. You wouldn't dream of arresting the head of the local council because I sprayed some offensive graffiti on the wall of the public toilets, would you?
Well, very interesting. Thank you for the confession as well, Basil, about the post you put on my Facebook page. But yeah, you do make some very interesting points, and also we spoke at the beginning of this program about the resemblance, if you like, to and reminding us what happened to Julian Assange. Because if you remember, just to remind everybody about him, 2006 he set up this dead letterbox for would-be leakers, WikiLeaks. In April 2010, WikiLeaks releases footage of a US helicopter firing on civilians in Iraq. Then all of a sudden, in August 2010, Swedish prosecutors issued the first arrest warrant for Assange on 2 separate sexual assault allegations, which Assange said were without basis. He was later arrested in London in December 2010 and bailed soon after. And basically there was then this, went to the Ecuadorian embassy, and the UK Supreme Court rules that he should be extradited to Sweden. He basically enters the Ecuadorian embassy in June 2012 and officially granted asylum. And he addressed reporters from the balcony. Remember those iconic scenes where he's sort of talking about it being a sort of witch hunt. Then in February 2016, a UN panel rules that Assange had been arbitrarily detained by UK and Swedish authorities and calls for his freedom. Eventually, what happened this year, I mean, he spent a terrible time in Belmarsh prison. We saw horrible reports about him, and he was sentenced to 50 weeks in jail for breaching his bail bail conditions. And finally, the latest update was he was given this sort of plea deal in order to avoid zillions of years in prison. Basically what they said, if you plead guilty to one count, just one count, then we'll let you off and give you time off for time served. And I spoke at the time that I was appalled about the plea deal, because if somebody's innocent, then you should never, ever, ever admit to something just to get out of jail free. What's your take on that, Pele?
Well, sorry, I don't know. Can you just say the question again? Because I was just.
I was looking at the parallel with Assange and what happened to him, because everybody trumpeted him as the poster boy for free speech, basically, and he was a publisher. He wasn't the person who did the he didn't do the steal the secrets. He was merely the publisher, and it's about the responsibility and basically turning around and how he was criminalized and had this horrendous time, including in Belmarsh prison.
He was. I mean, the whole thing about Julian Assange was, if he was a publisher, then he was no worse than the New York Times during the case of the that whistleblower back in 1971. What's his name? The Pentagon Papers guy, Daniel Ellsberg. So Daniel Ellsberg was like Chelsea Manning. So neither Chelsea Manning shouldn't even have been jailed, let alone no one talked about the New York Times. So that's the whole point. If he was a publisher, he was exercising some discretion, but even revealing quite some of the secrets that the New York Times did, they were not prosecuted, and that's why the New York Times at the end called for his release. But I think wasn't. Yeah, but I mean, was he a platform or was he a publisher? Because no one is saying that Durov is even a publisher. So a publisher is somebody who intrudes on the editorial process, even if it's just something as mild as selecting which pieces are to be censored or not. Whereas so I don't know if Durov. All I know is interesting. I mean, just to take my take on it is that I find that I'm getting much more out of, let's say, X in its current iteration than I ever got out of Assange, to be honest, although Assange did become a kind of poster boy for censorship, because a lot of the stuff was not that interesting, to be honest, I mean, he and a lot of the sort of genocide videos that we see in TikTok are much more dramatic than that famous Reuters cameraman being gunned down or whatever by that helicopter. And there's a lot of sort of just rather dull stuff that was actually also circulating. I can't remember. I mean, but to be honest, guys, I mean, what was the real revelations out there? I think one of the things I heard from a guest last week was that the Podesta emails, the real secret there in the revelation in 2016, was that they were related to Pizzagate, this alleged sex trafficking, but we're never told about that. So that could be the real reason why he was locked up. Sorry, I'm not looking at it from a particularly principled stance, but
I think for me it's more about the erosion, if you like, of the rights to free speech, and the fact then, and I spoke publicly about this, the fact that Julian pleaded guilty to one of the charges under the Espionage Act, even though he was just a publisher, I felt was a big erosion of freedom of speech, and it actually put a lot of other journalists in a difficult position. What's your take on that, Basil?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, the Assange thing had, to use the popular term, a chilling effect on free speech. And that's the case with this arrest as well. It's a sort of stepping stones approach to silencing people. You can't say that, be careful of saying that. Our own Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has said you need to look out for a knock on the door if you are saying or posting the wrong type of thing on social media. So I've got my ears open all the time. Not that I ever suggest anybody commit any act of violence or anything like that, but we've seen someone arrested in recent days in Britain, and amongst the reasons why they were arrested, it was listed anti-establishment rhetoric. Now, this all goes back to the central theme, which we talk about a lot on TNT, about attempts to censor the internet, not just to censor the internet, but to narrow the acceptable thought corridor, basically. Again, our Home Secretary has talked about going into schools, primary schools even, and effectively indoctrinating people in the way to think, not encouraging critical thinking. Heaven forbid, I think us three are one of the last generations where we were given the freedom to think and study philosophers, ancient and modern, and generally expand our horizons. And although it may only seem like the tip of an iceberg or a small step arresting Durov, nevertheless, it's designed to sort of, I'd even go so far as to say, impinge on the human spirit one way or another. Now, Kim.com, the net entrepreneur, has launched a furious tirade directed particularly against Macron this morning on the X platform. And fair play to Elon Musk, obviously, for opening X up in a way such that he can post this sort of thing. He's accusing Macron of being a fraud, a liar, a puppet, and committing treason against his own people and the people of the European Union. He says the nature of the charges against Europe give it all away, and that only the unhinged Biden Department of Justice would come up with such dirty lawfare against a well-respected tech innovator and entrepreneur. The US government, he goes on, is manipulating the Western media and user-generated platforms to control the narrative in an effort to brainwash the masses. Only with mass propaganda could the US government execute its proxy war against Russia in Ukraine and simultaneously paint China as the supervillain, all in an effort to stop the expansion of BRICS, the multipolar powerhouse that is crushing the West. Well, there are wider issues. Is the stymieing of BRICS also factored into the arrest of Durov? Social media does play an enormously important role these days in shaping opinion. I mean, it's where the governments themselves make announcements these days. Gone are the dusty old press releases. If you want to find out what's going on, you go to X. It is the world's town square, and Telegram to a lesser extent. But if they're coming after Durov today, will it be Elon Musk tomorrow?
Well, I can tell you, but no. Well, Thursday we're going to get an update on exactly that, and to find out, because as I say, Errol Musk is going to be joining me yet again on the Muckrakers, and he will do that regularly. He's going to be with us on Thursday. We're going to be talking about that and the conversation with Elon and the concerns that he has, because obviously, as you rightly say, he will be next, and he's already had lots of hints of that as well. Assange, I always said I'd provide an update, because as soon as we saw those wonderful pictures, he seems to be doing very well. You might remember that his wife Stella organised a crowdfunding to pay for his legal fees and the private hire of a jet. Well, I can tell you, because I checked this morning, I said I'd do a little update. So far, they've raised £519,158, huge amount, from 10,745 supporters. So they bought a lot of jets, and hopefully some good respite for Julian. In the last few minutes available to us, I want to look at this Mark Zuckerberg letter, because it is extraordinary. What he's done is just been released, so it's hot off the press. He's basically, and probably no surprise to some people, he's admitted that the Biden-Harris admin pressured him into censoring Americans. He was basically down volume, if you like, on things about COVID. He also was told to throttle the Hunter Biden laptop story. Now, we've always suspected this may well be the case, and it's freedom of speech but not freedom of reach, and that's how they sort of throttle these stories. What's your take on that, Pele?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, it could have changed the election, and Twitter famously censored it. It was the original laptop story was published by the New York Post. You had 51 intelligence operatives also engaging in election suppression. Top deep state guys in America saying this was a hoax. That was appeared in the New York Times. So it wasn't just Facebook that downgraded it. That then Jack Dorsey's Twitter did, and the New York Times and so on. It could have made a difference in the election if you judged by what people said in the polls. They would have switched votes. They probably would have done. And if you look at the Putin interview with Tucker Carlson in February, I think it got 50 million views on X. Say huge reach, 100 times what an FT article would get. But it only got 10,000 views on when it was put out on Facebook. So that censorship was in play back in as recently as February. But as I said, I'm noticing that Zuckerberg's opened up Facebook much more. Things I've been posting from my X account onto Facebook, which would have been censored, no point, are getting a lot of hits. But anyway, so maybe he's having second thoughts. He's saying in a letter to Jim Jordan, a Trump-supporting head of the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee. In 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree. Ultimately, it was our decision whether or not to take content down, and we own our decisions. Now, the point is, I'm convinced with all the vaccine skeptics I've had on my show that there's a very, very strong case for the vaccine, at the very least, to have been ineffective. Whether it actually kills people, that's a moot point, but it's certainly not conspiracy theory. I'm really convinced about that. And the fact that they censored that, and they censored the whole ivermectin thing, which definitely was a working solution. I mean, we're talking about millions of deaths here. So who are talking about criminal content, and that's what the securocrats in London are talking about. Child pornography, illegal incitement. But I mean, here we have censorship, that if we hadn't had censorship, we could have opened up the discussion on ivermectin and saved literally millions of lives, So that's how free speech can actually save lives. It's not just an indulgence to speculate about what's going on in Brigitte Macron's crotch, Yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. And Zuckerberg, he's actually expressed regret for not being more outspoken against the government's pressure, saying that Meta aims to maintain content standards without political interference. Basil, last word from you.
Well, yeah, I mean, Facebook deleted posts criticizing the vaccine. It also deleted posts suggesting that COVID, such as it is, was developed in a Chinese laboratory, even though that theory has now been supported by so-called mainstream scientists and government agencies. It is this whole sort of, corporate media mainstream stranglehold on the narrative and attempts to strangle anybody outside that's central to the freedom of speech issues. Telegram would not delete posts that are critical of the vaccine, the lockdowns, or speculating about where COVID came from. Facebook did. That's why Durov's been arrested. Zuckerberg wasn't. Zuckerberg says he's going to push back against this in future, but the damage has been done, hasn't it?
You make some excellent points. Well, Pele, Basil, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. As I say, here on the Muckrakers, we continue to shine a spotlight where others don't. I've got some great guests lined up. We're going to be joined again, as I say, by Elon Musk on Thursday. So do follow us at Andrew Eborn, at TNT Radio Live for more information. And if you've got suggestions as to areas where you would like us to shine a spotlight, do get in touch and let us know. But for me, for now, thank you very much for joining us. I will look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Take care.
If you missed this hour, simply go to episodes at tntradio.live